So what we wanted to do is to just go around. I've got 12 people online. We know from experience that we don't actually have time, unfortunately, to get everyone to be able to introduce themselves in detail, because it would take, unfortunately, too long. But it would be really nice to hear from everyone. So if everyone could unmute their microphone so we can hear from them. And I'm going to ask each person in turn to basically just say who they are and what institution they're from, just so we know that you're there and the speakers know that they have an audience. So I said I'm going to just go through a list and invite everyone in turn just to say hello and from which institution and where they're from, so we know who's online. So hello to everyone. If you don't know who I am, I'm Laura Watts. I'm at the IT University of Copenhagen, and along with Kate Johnson and Sandy Kerr, I've been helping to organise the ISSMER online seminars and ISSMER as an organisation. I'm going to pass now to Buka. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Bauke Wiersma, PhD student at the University of Exeter, looking into public acceptability of tidal, wave and offshore wind energy in Guernsey.
Thank you. And over to Glenn Wright. Glenn, can you unmute your microphone? Glenn.
Sorry, Glenn Wright. I'm based at Sciences Po University in Paris.
Okay, thank you. Can we hear from Jackie? Introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Tweddle. I work at the University of Aberdeen and Marine Scotland Science. I'm a research fellow in marine spatial management.
Cool, thank you. And Kieran? You're offline at the moment, in which case, Leanne Sandula.
Yeah, I'm a student at Dalhousie University.
Hi, welcome to you. And Lucy, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Greenhill, a research fellow in marine planning and renewable energy at the Scottish Association for Marine Science in Oban, Scotland.
Great, thank you. Tavis? Tavis, can you just introduce yourself?
Hello everybody. Certainly can. Hello everybody. My name is Tavis Potts. I'm a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Aberdeen, School of Geography and Environment.
Cool, thank you. And Rhys Howell.
Hello, Rhys Howell, PhD student, University of Edinburgh.
Great, nice to have you with us. And Beth Scott. Beth, we can't hear you. No, okay, Beth, I'm sorry we can't hear you, but Beth Scott is present. I believe she's from Aberdeen. Shelley, if you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, Shelley McDougall from Acadia University in Nova Scotia, Canada, and the Acadia Tidal Energy Institute. Great,
good to have you with us. And we may have other people joining us shortly. Okay, Kate. Kate, are you with us? I think she's still trying to sort out some technical things. Let me just unmute her. Kate.
Can you unmute us? Yes. How's that? Is that
perfect?
Is that better?
That's wonderful.
Good. Yeah. We've got the new microphone on. So hi, I'm Kate Johnson. I'm assistant professor at ICIT in Orkney, and I work with marine spatial planning.
Brilliant. So Kate, do you want to start by introducing the first presenter?
I sure will. Can you pass me those papers?
This was, yeah. Okay, I think it's 6.
Thank you. Sorry for the panic. Anyway, first off, Tavis, oh no, sorry, Shelley is going to be talking, and she's going to be talking about the value of delay and implications for government policy in marine renewable energy development. So, Shelley, it's all yours.
Okay, Shelley, I'm going to share the screen with you so you can be a presenter. That's better. Perfect.
Okay.
We can see your slides and we can hear you.
All right. Now, my image is in my way, and I got to get right. Okay. Are we good now?
We're all good. Looking forward to hearing from you, Shelley.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel a little blind here, but I am hearing you a wee bit better, so that's so great. So I wanted to tell you about a little bit of an analysis I've been doing on the use of on the delays and the reasons for the delays that device developers and project developers seem to be occurring with getting installations going, and have noticed quite a bit that over and over the projections for installations seem to be pushed off further and further into the future. So I began to wonder why, and have often thought that maybe there's value in waiting, and there is a method in finance for evaluating the value of waiting. So here it goes. There is a decision being made by developers. Typically, this happens a lot in resource development, where you decide to invest now or wait for later if you have an option to wait. And it's because of risk and uncertainty and costs and so on. So to begin, I guess a little bit of an overview. As you all know, an investment in tidal energy carries a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of things still unknown, and it includes a lot of risks with technology and the supply chain, a nascent supply chain, and as well government policies surrounding how well and for how long they'll support tidal energy. I'm going to focus my analysis on the Bay of Fundy, because we've been observing the delays here, and I'm going to use data that's available for here in Nova Scotia. So the thing about the uncertainty is that as time passes, some of that uncertainty will be reduced, and that has value, and it creates an incentive to wait. So now, waiting means that someone else might move on in advance of you, and so there are costs to waiting. But if the value of waiting is actually greater than the value of going ahead, then economically it makes sense to wait. Some of the things that you forego by waiting is the revenues that you would be generating if you were to install your devices. And here in Nova Scotia, we have a feed-in tariff for energy produced, and also first-to-market spoils. And so a lot of times in technology, the first to market has an advantage in the marketplace. But since these same device developers are working elsewhere in the world, particularly in Orkney, getting their devices developed and tested and so on, delaying in the Bay of Fundy may not be that much of a cost. So they can continue to develop their technologies where the waters are a little easier to work with. Bay of Fundy is very tough water here, and where jurisdictional policies are, more useful and supportive. So looking at that idea, I thought I'd look at the value of the option to delay, and I'll explain that a little bit more. It can be estimated using a stock option pricing model, and then compare it to the net present value, which is the typical method for evaluating an investment now. So here are just some numbers that I'm using based on the consultant's report that a consulting firm was asked to advise the government as to what sort of feed-in tariff would be appropriate for large-scale in-stream tidal energy. And they interviewed a number of developers and so on, and came up with certain numbers and a feed-in tariff. And so I'm just going to use those numbers, knowing full well that those would have bias in them, and that the time has passed, and so costs are different. But it gives us, everything's all relative, so it gives us something we can start with. So the net present value of investing in a tidal array, and this is 10 megawatts, 1.25 megawatt device, and 15-year economic life. The present value, the energy that would be produced, 33,000 megawatts megawatt hours per year, and at the price, the feed-in tariff that is offered here, then and discounted all the present value, everything present value to at 11%, shows that there's a net present value, so a net benefit of $2,605. And sorry, I forgot my currencies here. So you see, and an internal rate of return of 11.42%. So in the takeaway point from this slide is that $2,600,000 would be the net value of a 15-year investment in a 10-megawatt array. Now, if you take a look at the value of delay, what we do is we estimate the value using the Black-Scholes model for pricing a European call option on a dividend-paying stock. So the reason, well, I'll come back to the reason in a second, but I added some input assumptions to what I used in the net present value analysis. The assumptions are that the developers here have 3 years to deploy their devices at the berths at the Fundy Ocean Research Center for Energy here in the Bay of Fundy. And that there's a certain amount of uncertainty, of volatility of their forecasted cash flows, the standard deviation really, of 40%. And when you put these numbers into the Black-Scholes option pricing model, it shows that actually the economic value of delaying is $14 million. $14,700,000 versus the net present value of investing now, $2,600,000. So when you look at these numbers, it is it's a bit obvious that it's better, more valuable to delay investing until uncertainty is resolved, and than investing now. And you can see that I'll give you, first of all, show you there's the formula. I'm not sure if you want me to go through that. It takes me 2 days with my students to go through this formula, but it's a Nobel Prize winning formula for valuing stock options, and it applies really well to investments in real assets like this. I'll give you a little bit of a background as to why this is this way, is because the uncertainty is really the way it goes. If you make an investment right now, you break ground, you spend the money, and you've taken on the risk. With an option, you haven't taken on much risk yet. For the developers here, they're paying berth fees. They are foregoing some income that they would get from generating electricity, but on the whole, they're just paying berth fees, and waiting while others blaze the trail. So if someone else were to go first, they would encounter the setbacks that would come with supply chain problems and construction problems, and the backlash from community, all the sort of dealing with all the risks, and then a subsequent developer, you can come in, do it more cheaply, do it with fewer delays and problems, and so the only amount of money that the person with the berth fees is risking is the amount spent on the berth fees, as opposed to the big capital investment, which is irreversible once spent. So it's a bit of an asymmetrical risk situation where there's a limited downside risk. You can lose your berth fees and never develop, but you have all the upside potential of later delaying or later making your capital investments. So you get all the benefits of that later. So that asymmetrical risk has a different nature than what would happen if you were to make a net present value calculation and investing now. So that's why the option pricing model is used, because it's able to capture the asymmetrical risk. So taking another look at this, so since it's so valuable to weight, I thought I would take a look at how that value of weighting changes as we make changes in the assumptions. So for instance, the standard deviation, so this is the volatility, the unpredictability of the cash flows. This will be the cost and the revenues and the amount of energy that could actually be generated and so on. I used 40% in my original calculations, and if you were to just say, okay, let's suppose that the risk is not that high, the unpredictability of the cash flows is a standard deviation of 0.25, then you'll see that the value of weighting is less. But if the risk is higher, a 60% standard deviation, the value of weighting is even greater. And we're talking about weighting for a full the full 3 years. Now, also, speaking of years, the years to expiry, here's the 3-year estimate. I use that variable value for that variable to start. 3 years, you can see that if the developer had to get their devices in the water generating power within 1 year, then the value of weighting is less. And the value of weighting, if they have 4.5 years, is much higher. So the longer they have, the better. And the reason that is because when you have asymmetrical risk, limited downside and unlimited upside, then the more the risk, the better. So the volatility, there's a positive correlation with the volatility, positive relationship, and then there's a positive relationship with the years to expiry. And you can see the discount rate, I did that as well. There's an inverse relationship there. And so you can see that the higher your cost of capital, the less valuable it is to weight. So this sort of tells me that maybe, and developers know how to do this, the really large companies use option pricing model for, they are fully aware of it. And others may not know how to do it, but probably intuitively feel the risk and feel that it would be better to wait. So it has implications for policymakers because here, I believe, in Force in Nova Scotia, the developers have not completely unlimited time to break ground, but it's written into the individual contracts, and they need to be showing that they are making progress. But I don't think there's any firm deadline on getting it in the water and generating electricity, and so it's a bit open-ended. So it's really making the value of weighting quite high. Presently, there's a lot of value in owning the option to develop, but waiting to invest, and so policymakers really need to understand that, because there are things that they can do to increase the incentive to invest now and reduce the value of waiting, and that includes such things as putting firm time limits on when the deployment has to occur, and good long-term predictable government policies that reduces the policy risk. So it allows developers to know what the score is, know how long they'll be supported, know what the price will be, and so on, and that reduces some of the uncertainty. So the volatility would be reduced, the volatility in cash flows. And then other things such as government investing in infrastructure and financial supports and supporting the development of the supply chain and so on. These things will help reduce the uncertainty, and so the standard deviation is smaller. And it may eventually get changing several of the variables by increasing these policies and supports, or improving the policies and supports, may change the balance and will encourage the developers to invest. So many are not aware of that, and what I'd like to do is do some research now to get more robust numbers. I'd like to change from the numbers that were used for the COMFIT to use numbers that are actually being considered by developers, and as well to get a measure of the standard deviations they're using. You think each line item on their capital investment evaluation, their operating costs and maintenance costs and so on, they would have a certain band of uncertainty. And if I could get better numbers on those, I'd like to put that into a Monte Carlo simulation and come up with a more robust measure of the standard of the risk, the standard deviation, and a better starting point in terms of what the costs and the expected revenues are, so that I can have a better feel for at what point it would tip the balance into investing now as opposed to waiting. Those are my references. So there are many others, but those are the ones that I've really cited directly. And that's basically my model. Any questions about that? Or do you want to wait for questions?
Okay, we'll wait for questions, Shelley. I think the way we've done it the last couple of times seemed to work. Okay. So we'll go through the three presentations and then we'll go into discussion. Is that okay with you, Laura? Okay, and Tavis is talking about, is the blue economy fit for purpose in terms of delivering a low carbon society?
Can you see my screen okay?
We can.
You're
see
fine, Tavis, go.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Hello, everybody. Nice to speak to you all around the planet. This is just this is more of a discussion piece or some ideas for our discussion afterwards, rather than a formal seminar. It's just some things have been sort of rattling around in my head, more or less, for the last few presentations and things that I've been giving. So I'll be quite brief. The general idea here is that we're seeing substantial expansion, or at least expansion of several industry sectors that constitute or under the umbrella of the low carbon economy. This, obviously, the leading candidate here, what we've just been talking about, Shelley, is renewable energy and wind, wave and tidal. Various activities are occurring in separate streams: marine spatial planning, which we're obviously going to hear much more about this afternoon from Kate; blue carbon, which I'll touch upon briefly. These are all occurring within what broadly we can call a blue growth paradigm. Also, we're seeing emergently, I wouldn't say it's widespread at this point, but certainly in several countries and also in several regional groups, whether this is the European Union or regional seas agreements such as sort of Southeast Asia in PEMC or the Baltic. We're seeing these blue growth strategies, for want of a better word, and specific examples with Ireland and Scotland and EU. We also are seeing, the presentation's over my text, there we go. We're also seeing that there's no really agreed definition of what the blue, green, or low carbon or maritime economy is. And one thing I'm interested in discussing is actually what are the implications of this. Shelley just mentioned policy uncertainty going forward. That's certainly one of the implications, as even within the world of the green economy, which is driven by more or less UNEP or the UN CSD, there are multiple definitions for what the green economy is, or the low carbon economy, or the sustainable economy. The blue economy also has the same problem with multiple competing definitions. My final point for discussion is, to what extent should climate change drive the concept of blue growth? The two concepts are clearly related, but as one of my ideas, and one of the things I've been noticing, is that actually many nations and many regions are trying to place a bet each way in terms of supporting the existing maritime economy in general, as well as grow the low carbon element. And I'm wondering what the implications of this strategy is. We've all seen these, but I found this slide today from NASA, which is a nice summary, sort of outlining, I guess, in some ways, the urgency of the climate change and the findings of the IPCC, the most recent assessment that were obviously clearly very certain that human activities are responsible. Carbon levels are sitting at about almost at 400 parts per million, may have even crossed 400 parts per million now, and we haven't seen this for at least 800,000 years in terms of the geological record. sea level is the rates of sea level rising at faster rate over the past 40 years, and excessive melting of various ice sheets in the polar regions. So we have a very, very serious issue on our hands when it comes to climate change, and not only in terms of the physical science, but the impacts on society and the impacts on the economy are potentially profound. I've heard it described as almost existential, and one of the new ideas that has emerged recently, and which did actually get brought up for the first time into the most recent IPCC report, was the idea of the carbon bubble, where we have a certain allotment of carbon we can burn over time, and in the ground of known reserves that we have of coal, oil, and natural gas come to about 2.8 billion tons of CO2. But in terms of if we are to stay under the globally agreed consensus of 2 degrees, that really we should only be burning 565 billion tons of CO2. So this creates a massive social and economic problem of what happens with these reserves that are known, that are economically in the system. How do we deal with that? They essentially it's become a stranded asset. So in terms of going back to the idea of definition, I've hopefully established that climate change is a huge issue, and that we obviously have to deal with it within a certain time frame, get our act together by 2020. And this comes back to the strength of the green economy, and as one vehicle, I would argue one of the key vehicles actually to dealing with climate change. And we have various definitions flowing around. Green economy is one that is, this is a UNEP one, improved health, well-being, social equity, reducing environmental risks, and importantly, it's low carbon, it's resource efficient, and socially inclusive. Very broad, can be applied in a number of different areas, in a number of different ways. Another, this is from the Green Jobs Report by UNEP. I quite like this definition. It's specifically targeting industries that provide products or services related to renewables, efficiency, clean transportation, etc., etc. So there's a focus here on actual green economic sectors. We go onto the blue side, onto the marine coastal side of the equation, and we see a subtle shift or change in the language here. Blue growth, this is the EU definition. I struggled to find a definition from the EU, but it's the long-term strategy to support sustainable growth in the marine and maritime sectors. The Irish government is quite direct. They call it the ocean economy. It's defined as including any economic activity which directly or indirectly uses the sea as an input. And if we start looking at them side by side, on one hand, the green economy is very broad. It land and sea, different sectors, renewable energy, transportation, waste, food, green buildings, a lot of different sectors. And there are 2 themes in the green economy, that of greening the existing economy, so making brown activities or traditional activities more greener, and these new growth sectors, such as renewables. Blue growth, however, it becomes more mixed. There is certainly an element of low carbon within that, but what we see, particularly in the European strategy, is also an emphasis on the traditional maritime industries, oil and gas, mining and aggregates, fishing, as well as the 5 key areas which are represented by an asterisk, which are the areas that the EU is investing in as the key blue growth areas: aquaculture, tourism, renewables, biotech, and mineral resources. So I'm arguing that in the blue economy, in the dialogue of the blue economy, with no universally wide or recognized definition, that green principles do exist within the concept of the blue economy, but they're not consistent. They're not consistent between countries, they're not consistent between definitions or between regions. It certainly has an element of traditional greening of traditional industries within that overarching conceptual framework, but the emphasis appear to be on maritime growth and not necessarily green growth. And that creates a problem when we have a very limited time and a substantially urgent issue in terms of dealing with the impacts of climate change, which will manifest over the coming decades. And I'll just, in terms of time, I won't go through this slide. I have about 4 or 5 minutes left, but there are various definitions here of the blue economy from different countries, and if you look at them, all of them except for the UNEP one on the bottom, all of them are actually about boosting traditional maritime activities or any activity that derives on the ocean. So this could be oil and gas, it could also be renewables. And this differentiation is having a bet both ways, I think, actually creates some problems for the expansion of the low carbon economy. It creates policy uncertainty. So in response to that, I've been playing around with a concept, and for argument's sake, I've called this concept a coastal low carbon economy. And what the coastal low carbon economy does is focus the lens or focus the spotlight specifically on linking the low carbon growth and the green concepts of the green economy with the blue economy or with blue growth. But it's purely focusing activity and sectors on this question in relation to climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. I personally, from my experience, think that the coasts have generally been left out on the debate of mitigation adaptation. The language has traditionally been about risk management. How do we deal with floods? How do we deal with sea level rise and flooding and inundation of cities and communities? And too little of the emphasis has actually been how can we harness the assets of the coast, how can we harness the resources. Coasts are the where places live, work and play, where most of the population lives. How can we harness these assets actually to create growth and sustainable development opportunities are based around a low carbon model on the coast, rather than just focusing on risk. And this has been a problem all the way up, not only from the local level, but all the way up to the United Nations level in the discussions of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where things such as the REDD+, mangroves and coastal systems are starting to be discussed in that, but a specific focus on the coast as an engine of growth in the low-carbon economy hasn't occurred. And I'm now building up research and tracking and looking at different regions and different areas according to these various criteria that come around this flower-like looking model. And to briefly touch upon those before I conclude, I'll start with sector development. A coastal low-carbon economy actually actively facilitates sectors that offer innovation potential and employment potential and investment. And I'm quite interested in some of the stats that Shelley has produced before. But they relate directly to mitigation and adaptation. So this includes marine renewable energy, and obviously wind, wave and tidal are the key sectors there. There are other more experimental sectors, and wind is obviously the most developed, particularly in Europe, where we're seeing several countries, mainly around the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, seriously invest in wind. Approximately about 7,000 megawatts across 70 or so wind farms across Europe, with projections up to 40 gigawatts of production power by 2020. Very, very ambitious there. But certainly in terms of global distribution, most of the wind capacity development is occurring within Europe. But there are other sectors in the low-carbon economy as well, not just about renewable energy. And I think some of the marine planning systems fail to recognize that. This is things such as low-carbon and ecotourism, low-carbon food and biomass production, particularly aquaculture and algae and alternative energy sources, low-carbon infrastructure such as ports or green ports and green shipping, and low-carbon transport and logistics. They're all part of the equation. I'll leave off marine and spatial planning because Kate's going to cover that in some detail, just to say that marine planning really does bring together all these different uses, and how much is the low carbon economy ideal coming into marine spatial planning? Is it really helping drive this system forward? A huge topic and a really exciting topic is the concept of blue carbon and ecosystem services. Ecosystem services is the broad issue that relates to how we derive benefits from the natural environment. But in terms of low carbon economies, blue carbon offers a very interesting lens, and where the role of blue carbon is where coastal systems such as mangroves and seagrasses and salt marshes sequester and store large amounts of carbon, and at a much higher rate, or at least a parable or higher rate than, say, rainforests or other land-based systems, and potentially more effective at much longer-term sequestration than terrestrial forest systems. So this is very interesting in developing economies and advanced economies in terms of payments for ecosystem services, and we're only just starting at the tip of the iceberg in how blue carbon can be operationalized in a policy framework around payments. And the coastal low carbon economy model explicitly recognizes that conservation of natural capital alongside economic development is a key part of this model. It isn't just about industry development, it's a key function of it. As is also the development of skills and education and innovation. The OECD is very interested in these types of things. Do we have the right skills? Do we have the right skill sets and training for communities and for professionals to actually develop the low carbon economy? This is a particularly sharp issue in the renewable energy economy, where we have the right systems of training, the right pathways for professionals to actually develop these systems. And each place is different, and advanced economies and emerging and developing economies will all face different challenges and opportunities when it comes to skills, innovation, and education. So it's this model which I'm now actually applying to various case studies, and I'm doing some work for the OECD at the moment about looking at different regions. This model is firmly based in the regional level rather than the national level, because these various things, sectors and blue carbon and community engagement, is necessary. Oh, sorry about that. That's my son calling me on Skype. So for discussion, I guess it's, are blue economy regimes fit for purpose? Can policy reconcile, society reconcile the need for urgent structural changes versus demands of financial crisis or austerity? Two very much competing oppositional pillars. And does the low carbon concept hold in terms of an integrated strategy for adaptation and mitigation? And who is in and who is out? What are the actual economic or the social implications of a low carbon growth model, and how do we deal with that in mainstream economic policy? So really it's just food for thought, and I'm really interested to actually get some discussion around this. That's all from me.
Fantastic, Tavis. Thank you very much indeed. That's part of a building picture here this afternoon. So,
sorry, my wife is trying to call me on Skype during this presentation. Apologise for that.
That's fine. What I'm going to do now is, Kate, I'm just going to switch over to you so you can be the presenter. So again, thanks very much, Tavis. That was fantastic, and I think links on very nicely from Shelley's, and coming at it from a different perspective. Okay, Kate, you're now presenter. If you want to accept that, we can see. Hopefully, we'll be able to see your screen.
Let's try that.
Okay. We can see your screen. You just need to, expand your slides.
Okay, is that there?
That's perfect, yes.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Tavis, for that introduction, which fits quite well with what I'm going to say. I'm not going to talk a lot about marine spatial planning as such. I'm going to give a couple of examples. But I'm going to talk about the politics of planning. What really interests me is how all these various objectives are brought together or not brought together, as the case may be. And I think the points that Tavis raises about what we're planning for. Are we planning for jobs and growth, which is a huge incentive? Are we planning for a low carbon economy? Or are we planning for ecosystem services? And all of that brings us into the area of what is the politics of planning. And everything we do in the ocean environment, once we move across the low tide mark, then we start to lose sovereignty as far as individual states are concerned, and reliant more and more on international law, which has nothing of the certainty of individual state laws. So we start with a fair gap, but I think most definitions recognize that marine spatial planning, it's a political process, it's about politics, it's about balance. And because we have so many holes in our ocean government structure, there is lots of scope for politics to be played. People have different ideas, different agendas, and until the whole governance structure is clearer and more certain, there is room for people to project their own agendas and in some cases to make mischief with other people's agendas. So we have gaps in governance. We need to also consider the justice element, whether it's justice to future generations or justice to present generations in less developed countries. And we need a rule of law. But all that equals politics, and all that comes down to power. If we look at where governance has come from, this idea that human affairs should be steered in some way, steered by what? And you have these three possible elements of state control, top-down, expert opinion, saying this is the way it's going to be done. We can leave it to neoliberal economics, to market forces, or we can develop ideas about public interests, people and civil society. So administrative rationality, economic rationality, or deliberative rationality. I just wanted to run through just some examples of what is happening in the international scene as those questions of governance, questions of justice, and questions of the rule of law start to bite home. What you're seeing on the screen at the moment is a view of the Arctic Ocean and the 5 countries who have carved it up between them, and carved it up in accordance with the law as it now stands. UNCLOS 3 and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines the areas which these states may claim to be under elements of their jurisdiction, not complete jurisdiction, because sovereignty doesn't apply completely, but certainly the resources do. And we find that the whole of the Arctic Ocean, as the ice retreats and the resources becomes available, is assigned to one of these 5 states: the United States, Russia, Norway, Denmark, and Canada. And I don't know if that was in the mind of people when the convention was being negotiated back in the 80s, but probably not, that we've regarded the North Pole as public land, open land, common land, or common ocean. But we find now we have it just allocated to these 5 countries, in contrast to Antarctica, where we have a treaty, albeit countries have sovereignty claims in Antarctica, but which are in abeyance while this treaty holds good. But we have multinational governance of Antarctica with a broader interest than just the resource development of a few countries. Let's say a couple of words now about, when we're talking about objectives for marine spatial planning, diverse objectives for planning, whether they are jobs and growth, whether they are low carbon economy, whether they're ecosystem services. This is, we're doing some work at the moment with Technion Institute in Haifa on the marine spatial plan for Israel. And Israel has some very, very key interests from its relatively small area of EEZ. Israel's primary concern is security. They see themselves with only one agreed boundary, and that is their bilateral agreement with Cyprus, which gives them exit to the Mediterranean Sea and to international waters. Every other boundary they have, whether it be a terrestrial boundary or whether it be a marine boundary, is disputed or is in doubt for one reason or another. So they have a very keen interest in security. They also have a very keen interest in developing the oil and gas resources in their EEZ, and they are now self-sufficient in gas. and they're sitting on some of the best gas reserves in the world at the moment, and they're anxious to exploit those, both for their own uses and for export. But when they consider export, they want to be able to export in a very secure way. And so their network of pipelines, which are going to come particularly from the Leviathan field, which is out towards the limit of the EEZ, it's dictated by their security considerations of how they can keep control of the gas with minimum security risk as it's developed. Their other concern, excuse me, just had a cold. Their other concern is population growth. The population of Israel is booming. It's now around about 13, 14 million, and expected to go to 20 million by 2030. And they're considering the construction of artificial islands along the coast to give them more space to carry out land-based activities in the sea. So their interest is economic and security. Pardon me. The whole area of that part of the Mediterranean is oligotrophic. And as far as they're concerned, fisheries don't count. It's not an issue in their marine spatial planning. One of my students raised this year. We run a master's course here at Marine Spatial Planning. One of my students from Gardner, Eric, raised this question of ship recycling. And when you see pictures like this, you think, well, where is the justice in this? This is essentially Western problems or rich world problems being dumped on third world, less developed country beaches. The Hong Kong Convention, which was signed in 2009, sets out to correct some of the injustices of this situation. But of 67 countries who signed the convention in 2009, only 3 have ratified it, and they should all have ratified by now. Of justice between various parts of the world is also highlighted in piracy, and this was again raised by Eric, that the number of piracy incidents, you can see the countries. So most of these piracy incidents are happening in bases from lesser developed countries. Again, a question of justice, rule of law, and governance in the ocean environment. And we can't hope to get an effective planning regime, a transboundary planning regime that affects all our oceans, if we can't close the holes in our governance and justice structures. And that, I think, is the role of marine spatial planning, is to cement that political process which supports that. Where won't that go? The last example I want to use is one which people in North America will be very familiar with, which is the proposal for the Cape Wind, for Cape Cod wind farm. Am I still on? The yellow area there is the richest piece of real estate in the United States, which is the part of Cape Cod overlooking Nantucket Sound. And the proposal in 2001 was for 170 turbine offshore wind farm, which immediately was objected to by some of the richest and most powerful people in America, who are making their money from oil and gas and coal and industry. So people stand up and say things like, I agree with renewable energy, but not here. The green area in the bottom left-hand picture is where the poor people live. And in the red area in the right-hand picture is where current electricity is generated for that part of Cape Cod, which is, quite frankly, a dirty oil plant. And the oil comes up through Brunswick Sound, just close to the green area there. And there have been several oil spills in that part of the world. So the case for a clean wind farm to supply electricity to these very rich Americans in Cape Cod is a strong one. It's a good one. But the objection, and the political objection, and the political clout, the money that went into objecting, was just huge. There have been 26 lawsuits over the positioning of this wind farm. It is perhaps a good thing that every single one was lost, but nonetheless, these were people with the money and the power to use arguments which, in actual fact, most of us might have some sympathy with. But they have the money and the power to actually take it to court. They set up, and this is Kennedy country, by the way. It's Kennedy country. It's Mitt Romney country. It's Donald Trump country. These are the people who can stand up and object. Not Jack Kennedy himself, of course, but certainly his descendants. So the threats, according to the Alliance, you see they've got a little tab at the top of their website about Cape Wind threats. The threats they list are the desecration of tribal lands, the enclosure of the commons and misuse of public land. They complain about the fact it's an industrial project, that it's for profit. It's as if none of them actually were interested in profit, but it's for profit. They produce reports to say that there will be a loss of jobs, a loss of tourism, lower property prices, lower output from fisheries, increased costs of power, increased costs to the public purse. They argued about the loss of habitats and species and in the environment on Horseshoe Sound, or Horseshoe Bank, where the wind farm was proposed. They talked about public safety, about danger to ships, danger to aircraft, danger to shipping and to fishing. And they talked about the loss of view, and they quote quite widely UK experience and European experience. So none of those arguments in themselves are ones that any of us might disagree with. But in creating that balance between governance, justice, and the rule of law, in the political scene, these people had the connections, the power, and the money to carry their case to court. Donald Trump, of course, has tried this on in Scotland, and I think drawing on his experience of Cape Wind, he objected to the wind farm off his golf course off the coast of Aberdeen, but as that cartoon indicates, he's lost that case. So what lessons for ISSMER from that? I just wanted to put up three questions about what next for ISSMER. The first point is that we should broaden our sectors, that As Tavis mentioned, the blue economy, the blue agenda, the blue growth agenda, all of which have social impact. And the other examples that I've just shown shows it's broader than just marine renewable energy. It's broader than just the blue economy. It's wider than that. Should we perhaps consider ISSMER looking at something wider than that? That we look at the whole blue growth agenda and the blue economy and the issues around that, as well as just marine renewable energy. The second point, that we should internationalize the research agenda to include issues outside Western interests to the less developed countries, the problems that they face, for example, from Western countries and rich countries dumping their vessels on their beaches, so that any idea of ecosystem services from their beaches is laughable. And then investigate the political interests, that if we are going to be looking at social studies, what is affecting people, we must also understand the politics that goes behind that. Who are the power brokers, and what are their objectives, what are their agendas, when we see how that spreads through the rest of society. The three basic principles we need for marine spatial planning. If marine spatial planning is to be effective, if it's to work, we need sound governance, we need justice, and we need the rule of law. All of which I think suits an ISSMER agenda and opens us up to an extremely interesting area of future research. So that's my point, and I apologize for the coughing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was incredibly interesting and a great way to finish up the collection of 3 different papers. So do you want to go through the list of questions that we are going to get, Kate? Do you want to manage that, or should I?
Could you do that, Laura? I'd prefer it if you did.
Yes, that's fine. I'm just also thinking about your voice. So,
yes, thank you.
Just to remind people, what we're doing is we're going to be using, if you want to ask a question, if you can basically just sort of raise your hand or indicate you have a question in the chat box on the right-hand side of your GoToMeeting control panel. And then I'm going to sort of ask people, invite people to ask their questions as I go through that list. And then you just need to remember to unmute your microphone so we can actually hear you. So I'm just having a look in terms of questions. Right. So, okay. So if people have got questions, if they want to type in that box, I'll get things started while people are just kind of figuring things out. Shelley, hopefully you can hear me, because I know you've had some problems with your audio, but I have a question for you, actually. I was, incredibly interested let's just, Shelley, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. So, I was really, really interested in your approach that you were taking. It's something that's relatively, unfamiliar to me. But I wanted you to say a bit more, actually, about this net present value you've been calculating, and whether you could say a bit more about to what extent it actually is used by investors, VCs, or even angel investors at the moment. To just give a sense of the context by which these kinds of calculations are actually ongoing, and if you've got any sense about, has it affect decision making and investment in marine energy at the moment that you're aware of?
Well, I would say that it is used quite a lot. It is an industry standard. Oil and gas industry uses it a lot. Mining for mineral companies use it. If you think about how the price of oil is there's a volatility, certainly more recently than longer term. There's a certain amount of volatility, and with the volatility, the companies will hold their stores, their supply, or they'll reduce their production at a time like now when the price of oil is down. They look at the value of stopping production and waiting until it is better. And they can predict it fairly well because of an historical volatility of that particular resource, and it is used in the financial industry a great deal. Stock options are, as you know, are very common in investing, and the value of them is in that the downside risk is limited just to the amount you paid for your option, but the upside is as great as the how much the stock can go up itself. So it's a very much an industry standard model. In fact, it is used to calculate stock option value since it was developed. Now, large companies that have sophisticated finance departments and so on know how to calculate that and do it on a regular basis. And so we would have companies, the larger companies that are involved in marine renewable energy development would be looking at these things. A lot of the input numbers are hard to estimate, but yeah, definitely they're doing it. And the financiers are doing it as well. The VCs may or may not, depending on their particular skill set, but financial institutions, larger lenders, larger investors would definitely be using option pricing to estimate the value of delay.
Just to clarify then, so given that although certainly from my perspective marine energy is a kind of industry in the making, yes. And comparing it to oil is kind of for me a kind of apples and oranges, comparison. So what you're saying is actually it's almost like an indicator of a maturing of marine energy, given the fact that anyone's even considering using such calculations on something that's still quite unstable.
I would say that the value of using the option model is more important for a new technology. It's in no way, I'd say, an indication of its maturing. It is the higher the risk, the more valuable it is as holding the option instead of investing.
Okay.
So its immaturity is exactly why option pricing is useful. It's harder to predict. Oil and gas, prices of minerals and so on, very easy to predict, so the model is very useful in that situation. In our situation with marine renewable energy, the costs are not as easy to predict. We can't measure the volatility of past costs. We haven't had past costs in installations and operations and maintenance and so on. So I wouldn't want to give the impression that it's a really great fit, but it is definitely used. I would guess it is definitely being used in the calculation of whether to invest now or just wait a little while. And if you were to ask a developer, would you rather be the first to develop in the Bay of Fundy, or would you rather wait? Some would say, oh no, would rather wait. And so even if they're not using the methodology, the method to calculate the value, they're sensing it. They're feeling the risk of going first, and the option pricing model allows us to put a number on it, but it's still very pliable because of your input variables, what numbers you put into the input variables.
Cool. Thanks, Shelley. Sandy, you had a comment, a question?
Hi, I'm sorry, I think I'm just slightly off screenshot and beside Kate here, and I was unavoidably detained, and I just sort of dropped in the last half of Kate's presentation. But it was, I think it was an interesting point that Kate was making about sort of basically power relationships and who's got the power within the planning system. I think that with marine spatial planning, that we tend to sort of think of it as a benign thing, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool or a set of tools that it is applied to achieve an end goal, and you need to be aware that that end goal is set by somebody. It's somebody's agenda, and it's quite interesting. I can think of many examples where that's in the marine environment, where that has been kind of sort of hijacked, and I would look at, I might sort of other people in the virtual room here might have a different view, but certainly with aquaculture in Scotland, and there's a very good reason for pushing aquaculture development, for economic development, but increasingly the opportunities to object to development are sort of being closed out and limited, and right down to the fact that now if planning permission is granted for aquaculture development, that the right of third-party approval has been taken away altogether, so it's extremely difficult to object to anything or complain about it. So it's just a point to make that we're introducing marine spatial planning in a lot of places around Europe, a lot of places around the world are starting to look at it, but it's not in itself necessarily a benign thing. It's about how it's used and how it's implemented, and I think there's all sorts of interesting strand of research in there. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Kate.
Well, only sorry, Laura, only to add to the point that it's a political concept. You know, it's about politics. It's all about politics.
Tavis, you had a comment, and then after Tavis, Lucy.
I'm just in agreement with Kate's statement there, and also the fact that hi Sandy, how you going? I haven't spoken to you for a while. I think also as we marine spatial planning is like the low carbon economy is in its infant days. It is a relatively fairly new concept, and as that concept matures, we will see increasingly the political aspects, the tussles between sectors, between interest groups emerge. We're starting to see that in Scotland, and it's also very much about scale as a part of that process. And I certainly would love to hear from some other countries, because particularly Canada actually, because when you have different levels of government and with different levels of responsibilities, but potentially diametrically opposed views over the direction of the coastal blue economy, where one is really quite supportive, at least in terms of what I've seen on paper in Nova Scotia, and with the different policies at the federal level. This is certainly the case in Australia, with very, very different policies at federal level, and some of the states wanting to expand their renewable energy and low carbon aspects. So there's an internal political issue over scale as well in MSP.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Tavis. Lucy, you had some comments. Lucy Greenhill? Lucy? Lucy, we can't hear you. Okay, Lucy, do you want to sort out your microphone? No, you switched it. There we go. Yes. Still can't hear you, I'm afraid. Can you switch your microphone on and we'll come back to you? While you're sorting your microphone out, Lucy, just want to pass on to everyone who's listening. I had a typed comment from Bauke Wersma, and he was just apologising to say he couldn't stay for the discussion, but he was going to add that he and Emma McKinley from Chichester University are organising a symposium at the Royal Geographical Society conference in September. And that session will be all about the public perceptions and acceptability of offshore renewable energy. And he's going to post a call for papers next week onto the ISSMER mailing list, so everyone should look out for that, which I think will be really interesting. Okay, Lucy, have you had any luck with getting your microphone to work?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes, go for it.
Great. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what I did there. I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you for the presenters for interesting presentations. This is my first interaction with ISSMER, and it's really exciting because I'm just starting research in this same sort of area. I just wanted to zoom out a little bit again back to what Tavis was talking about and definitions of sustainable development or sustainability, because I'm starting from that basis as well in the work that I'm involved in. And I read something really interesting by John Robinson that you guys may be more familiar with already, and it's from 2004, about how he defined sustainable development, and basically that we will never reach an agreed definition of it because it really depends on individuals and where they sit on the scale of from ecocentric to anthropocentric worldviews. And what that means is that it really is an emphasis on how we create the tools to have the dialogue and the discussion to reach some sort of agreed principles and define progress and the sustainable development. And that's basically what I'm trying to get my head around a minute, because that opens up such a broad need for transdisciplinary and all those integrated words, and bringing people together and developing the tools for that. And then, because to me that sets the context of how you go about marine spatial planning. Until you've got that ability to have that dialogue that can account for people's different values and worldviews, then you don't really have a shared direction of where marine spatial planning should be taking you. So that's something that I'm looking into right now, and I'm working with the Commonwealth Secretariat in the Seychelles to help develop their roadmap towards a blue economy, and that's quite an interesting case study to be involved in, because like Kate was saying, it draws up interest in comparisons between a developing or emerging economy and developed economies, and there's quite a lot of different factors that could be used for an interesting comparative analysis of the different drivers towards sustainability and the different limitations and restrictions of either the institutional capacity or the social capacity, etc., in implementing sustainable development. So yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. Cool.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I think that was really interesting. There's a lot of connections, I think, there with other people's work. And also, when I finally figure out, there's been some technical issues with the recording. The recordings are fine. I just had to get them online. There'd been some delay over that. And when that happens, you might find the last ISSMER event quite interesting when we talked about communication. Because I agree, that's something that's certainly come up across all the discussions we've had in ISSMER, is thinking through this, what kinds of different communication, consultation. I come from an anthropology, science and technology studies background, where that issue is very much kind of prevalent, is, you know, how do we kind of find ways to think about the situatedness of the different knowledges that we have. Did you want to respond to that at all, Kate, or Tavis, or Shelley?
Well, I mean, from what Lucy was saying, I mean, the look in the Seychelles, I mean, that's extremely interesting to know how that link's developing, and also what you were speaking earlier on about is if I got that pronounced that right, about his session on people's perceptions of offshore energy, I think is extremely interesting. The Cape Wind example I use, though, I mean, Lucy talked then about breaking down barriers between people, so you can expose people's values and they can dialogue about them. But the Cape Wind example also showed how arguments can be misused. You know, the right arguments are turned on their head to meet an agenda, and that is more difficult to get through. I don't know quite how you do deal with that and get over it in the right way, but it's certainly something I want to look at in much more detail.
If I could, I'd like to. I'm not sure if Beth is able to speak, because we couldn't hear it before if she's back online. But Beth and I and Jackie as well is in here as well. We're working on a project at the moment on wind farms, and very much to do with public perceptions of the various user groups, not the general public. But what I personally find extremely challenging and fascinating and interesting is trying to reconcile. Sandy mentioned the issue with aquaculture and general issues of consultation. This incredible need and demand for a transition to a low carbon economy within 2 decades at the most, if we're going to avoid, frankly, catastrophic damage to coastal marine systems around the planet. But how do we square that with meaningful, transparent dialogue over what sort of model? And in some ways, almost the decision has been made that we need to make this transition if we want to avoid these types of impacts. At the same time, the scale, the scope, where things are in the water is a factor of planning. And I find that personally quite a difficult thing to deal with.
But it has to come, Tavis, doesn't it? It has to come through international, it has to come through treaty obligations, through international negotiations, that we have to build on UNCLOS. I mean, we perhaps now need UNCLOS 4 to close some of these gaps in governance, because as long as those gaps are there in an area where there is no state sovereignty as such, even in the territorial sea, you've lost sovereignty. Aspects of innocent passage and things like that. So as soon as you step over the low tide mark, you're starting to lose jurisdiction over everything. And if you're then going to deal with the transboundary issues and the international justice issues, then it's all about international treaty and agreement, and we have to strengthen that.
I think in terms of UNCLOS, yes, I agree with you definitely in terms of jurisdiction and lines on the maps and that aspect, but I'm not so sure in terms of the UN global treaty making process. I think I'm in two minds about the effectiveness of that process. It's necessary, but the scale, the pace, the politics, the necessary politics, I'm not sure if that's the best vehicle that's open. I think that's open for debate and discussion, whether that's the best vehicle for achieving change. And regionalism and localism seems to be a huge engine of innovation when it comes to the low carbon economy. It's very much, I would like to hear from everybody about this. We don't have time, but it's a good question.
Can I just respond to that, Tavis? And if other people want to respond, then please, indicate in the chat box or kind of leap in. But for me, one of the most useful moves I find helpful when I've been thinking about some of these issues is to move away from ideas about scale. So rather than thinking about we've got kind of international, national, kind of regional, but thinking about the different kinds of groups of people, different kinds of communities and different organizations and where they're actually located and what relationships they have. So, thinking about who are the people, who are the groups of people and what are their interests and where they're located that are involved in the treaty-making process, right? So, they're often located in particular kinds of places, they have particular interests, they have particular sets of knowledges that might be different from, other groups of people who are kind of at other kinds of activities. I mean, here in Denmark, for example, we have a number of kind of, UN, international, some will help me, but it's the International Maritime Organization. Not sure which one it is, apologies. Someone will know more than me, but they're based here in Copenhagen. And, there's a particular kind of way of understanding the sea here. We're on the Øresund, the Kattegat, pretty flat. Whereas a lot of the really interesting activity in terms of, what I think of interesting activity by groups of people is happening on the far west coast at the edge of Denmark in what's called the rotten banana, which is where it's, there's a lot less economic activity, but it's where the Danish Wave Energy Centre is. It's where the kind of the surfing community is. There's a group, the municipality out there, Tistral, won the European Solar Award because they've got geothermal solar. It's all cooperatively owned. All the interesting stuff I think you're referring to, Tavis. So for me, it's kind of like, how do we deal with the fact we've got different groups of people who all live somewhere? Everyone's part of a community somewhere. And how do we look at the intersection between these? So that the interesting ideas or activities happening in one place can then permeate the understanding about how the treaties, for example, that work internationally get done.
Very much the ethics too.
Yeah, cool. So we have a few more minutes for comments and thoughts from other people who are listening. We'd be very keen to hear from you. So while we're waiting for people to kind of think at various questions, does anybody else, particularly Sandy, who we can't see, do you have anything else you want to add? Otherwise, I was going to make a suggestion to talk about the fourth event we were also proposing.
Sorry, jumped in so late into this.
Can you hold that 1 second? I've just got a comment from Glenn. Glenn Smith, you wanted to make a brief comment, and then we'll come to you, Sandy. Glenn? Glenn Smith. We can't hear you. So like sometimes the system is a little bit slow. Glenn?
Hello?
Yes, Glenn, fantastic. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, it's a little bit dark here. My internet connection is also terrible, so sorry if it cuts out. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you. Go for it. You moved. That was tactically possibly an error.
It's
Okay,
frozen.
I just
Oh, you're
wanted
back
to...
again. Okay, go for it, Glenn.
my internet connection, it's pretty... That's frozen again?
Yes.
Maybe type your question, Glenn. Type your question.
I'll do that. It was actually more of a comment than a question, so perhaps I'll just leave it.
We can hear you if you want to make it.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Just on the definitions of marine spatial planning, I think the more discussions and seminars that I'm involved in related to marine spatial planning, the more interesting and dynamic its definition becomes. And I think some of those points have been raised today, and just seeing marine spatial planning perhaps as a vehicle for making certain things happen in a marine economy in terms of marine development, and going very much back to what Kate was saying about the power politics involved in it as well. And I think it's perhaps in that context interesting to consider how marine development is and perhaps will happen bypassing marine spatial planning in some contexts, as marine spatial planning moves very, very slowly and is taking such a long time to really solidify as a concept and as a means of organizing our marine activities. So that's kind of what I wanted to add.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for persevering with your Wi-Fi connection. So, Kate, Sandy, do you have any sort of last comments from your side as we're coming to the end of our time?
Yeah, I suppose it was picking up from Laura what you were saying and Tavis as well. But Laura, you were talking about different communities of people, and I think it's a big, we always look to land as a place where we have a spatial planning system as for a comparison. It's the obvious place to go. But there's a whole host of sort of fundamental sort of challenges and differences. And one of them for me is that things are a lot more clear-cut on land. You have people that own land and people that don't. And you have people that are physical sort of neighbours and those that aren't, that are third party. And the marine environment is just so much more challenging. There are a lot of people that are interacting with each other that aren't, they don't form part of a close spatial community very often. So it's difficult to negotiate that. You've got lots of sort of almost intermediary steps. You don't have sort of ownership and not. It's a sort of fuzzy area in the middle, and I think that makes it extremely challenging about trying to establish systems and to decide whose voices count and whose doesn't. It's not that it's always fair on land, but clearly in the land situation where you have an owner or adjacent owners, then their voices are quite high and are given a lot of sort of preeminence in the process. And it's very difficult in the marine environment to sort of work out that kind of pecking order almost of voice, of priority of voices, and that leaves the system open to manipulation, is the way that sort of Kate's hinted. So I think that's an interesting complication. And another thing that I kind of made in the last set of presentations that for me, that is this dilemma. Is it a dilemma? This requirement, if you're going to sort of make profit and we're going to have a blue economy, then it is necessarily the case that business is going to want to secure some sort of right over the resource. And while we're maybe not sort of creating sort of property exactly in the way that we define it on land, nonetheless you're creating individual rights, or rights of access, or right to be there, right to exclude other people, and it's a process of enclosure. And whether we like it or not, we're kind of sort of moving towards not exactly private property rights like we have on land, But as soon as you plan and you say somebody can go there and somebody can't, then you're starting to, move in that direction of creating some property rights, and a lot of people are not going to like that.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to link also to Shelley's work in terms of it's about making property, making value, these things about creating objects. Some kind of boundary around something that can be owned or traded.
And it's very easy to be sort of pejorative about that. But the reality is that if we're going to have a blue economy, then that is required. People need to use those tools, need to know what the net present value is, and then they need to be able to protect it legally, to have some sort of exclusivity over access or right or control over that resource. And it's just fundamentally the case. And it's sometimes a bit easy to sit back and go, isn't it terrible, the public good's being lost? And but well, it's maybe just how it is if we're gonna have a true blue economy.
Can I just make a quick comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that because we're now pretty much out of time and people may have to leave. So Tavis, if you want to make a very quick comment, just to kind of close up, and then I'll ask Shelley if you want to have anything final to say, and then we'll Kate, over to you. So Tavis.
Very interesting point by Sandy. One of the most least looked at aspects of marine spatial planning is the opportunity for industrial co-location and co-location opportunities between sectors. So despite the property rights issue, that has not been explored to any meaningful extent yet, and I think it's a really interesting part of MSP. That's all I want to say.
Shelley?
Nothing in particular to say regarding what's been discussed. I do want to mention I'm on sabbatical and looking for some colleagues to do some collaborative research with. So I just began my sabbatical the other day. What I just presented here is what I plan to do some data collection on. So working that out right now. Let me know if you're interested in chatting more about it.
Cool. Well, congratulations on starting the sabbatical, Shelley. Cool. Thank you, Shelley. And over to you, Kate, any sort of final comments? And then I was going to suggest we have a very brief talk about the potential fourth event. Kate?
Not really. I think we've had 3 really good sessions now. I think this whole series of webinars has worked really well. And the technology has been a good one. So it really now goes down to this 4th discussion session. So I think let's go straight to that, Laura, and tell us what you think is...
Okay, well, for those who are listening online, just to finish up with the fact that there's been just some discussion amongst some of us online. Glenn Wright in particular, you also, this was partly your idea, which I thought we all thought was a great one. So far, ISSMER has had a sort of rough organising committee of myself and Kate and Sandy, but we don't feel any strong sense of needing to maintain some kind of ownership. But we did think what would be important was to have a 4th event, since the technology is working so well, where we could, rather than have presentations, actually open up discussions, have more plenary between us, but also think about how we want to develop ISSMER, because there are a lot of possible collaborations. I mean, some of us are thinking, it would be nice to maybe see if we can get some research projects going. We do have a lot in kind of common. So we were thinking if we could maybe have a 4th event, if I'm getting a general sense of if people are interested to do that. Just as I said, there wouldn't be presentations, but an opportunity for people to actually get more of a discussion going and to think about how to develop ISSMER and other activities that we might do. So if people can kind of think about that. And Glenn Wright, I know you talked about it. Is there anything you particularly want to add? I don't mean to place you in the hot seat, but do feel free to jump in if there is. Glenn?
Hi. Yes, sorry, I am here. I was being quiet because I was cooking my dinner in the background. But no, I have nothing particular to add. I mean, I'm happy to play some sort of coordinating role and perhaps to give a 10-minute presentation that summarizes the presentations we've had in the 3 sessions so far, and perhaps some of the questions that I thought came up. But really, I just thought that right from the first session, what I found is that there was quite a lot of discussion to be had, obviously, and a lot of questions being posed. So it'd be great to have a session where we can just talk for an hour or so and just throw ideas out and whatever. So a bit less structured, perhaps, but just an opportunity to have that discussion would be fantastic, I think. So yeah. Great.
So, I think that's kind of what we're going to kind of do from here on in. We'll just make it happen, and there'll be Glenn will kind of pull you in. If other people want to help coordinate or that's great. Otherwise, we'll just send out a kind of invitation. What I'm proposing is I'm actually also going on a writing sabbatical. Well, that doesn't start for another few weeks. So I think ICIT, you have the con in terms of the technology. So if you and Glenn Wright sort of get together and set up some dates and times, I'd be very happy to participate, and I'm hoping everybody else who's listening will be happy to participate in the discussion as well, so we can kind of keep these conversations going, because so many of us have so many overlapping kind of different interests that relate across different disciplines. And I'm certainly really keen to keep that conversation going, but also develop it so we can, get potentially events happening where we can actually physically get together, but also, research projects going where we can kind of move the discussions and debates forward. So any final comments, Kate or Sandy?
No, thanks very much. Dora, again, thanks for looking after us so well.
You're very welcome. It's really lovely to hear from everyone. I'm hoping that everybody who's here will also join us on the next event, so we'll be able to hear some of your questions and discussions, because I think really what we're all really interested in is actually getting a discussion going between all of us. So thank you very much, everyone. I shall now get this recording online along with the others, so for those who weren't able to participate, they can at least hear a little bit about the discussion. So I'm here in the chat box. It was good to hear from you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shelley. It's fantastic to hear from you. Bye-bye.